So imagine waking up tomorrow and the entire blueprint of society is just gone.
Right, like completely vanished.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, traditional governments simply do not exist anymore. There are no elections, no Congress,
Hmm.
no municipal zoning boards,
Nothing.
nothing at all. Instead, human civilization is run completely by these self-sustaining family pods. And, those pods are backed by this unstoppable automated AI, robotic workforces, and cryptographic blockchain systems.
It is, well, it's the absolute definition of a structural paradigm shift. I mean, we are looking at a theoretical model today that basically replaces the entire apparatus of the modern state.
Yeah.
And it replaces it with localized biology and decentralized computer code.
And that is exactly the journey we are taking you on today in this deep dive, because our stack of sources outlines this radical, highly provocative, and just incredibly intricate blueprint for engineering what the author calls algorithmic stability.
Logarithmic stability.
Right, right. So we are going to, really unpack the mechanics of this proposed future. We'll start from the author's diagnosis of why historical civilizations collapse, all the way to this hyper-automated reality where smart contracts and nanobots basically handle our survival.
Yeah, but before we get into the actual mechanics of this, I think we really need to set some firm guardrails for the discussion.
Oh, absolutely. We have to.
Because the sources we are analyzing today, they rely heavily on these very rigid evolutionary psychology frameworks.
Extremely rigid.
Yeah, and they touch on highly sensitive, politically charged topics, regarding gender roles, the utility of modern education, social movements.
So we want to make it crystal clear to you, the listener, right up front, that this deep dive is an impartial analytical exploration of the author's theoretical model.
Exactly. We are not here to endorse these views at all.
Right, nor are we here to condemn them. I mean, our mission today is just to map out the underlying logic of the arguments. We want to examine the technological mechanisms they're proposing and just sort of see how the author attempts to solve the problem of human conflict.
We're treating this entirely as an architectural thought experiment.
Purely a thought experiment. So, okay, to understand the cure this author is proposing, we have to start by diagnosing the disease, right?
Right. And the foundational premise of their entire thesis is this phenomenon they term incompetence creep.
Incompetence creep. Okay, let's unpack this, because the way it's described in the sources, it feels like like a mashup of corporate management theory and evolutionary biology.
That's a really good way to put it, actually.
Because first you have the Peter principle, right?
Right.
That's the idea that people in a hierarchy tend to rise to their level of incompetence.
Right, like a great software engineer gets promoted to manager.
Exactly. A job they are terrible at, but they just stay there. And in the context of this source material, the author applies this concept to wealth and property over multiple generations.
Yeah, the author suggests that an elite class or, an entrepreneurial employer initially acquires massive amounts of property through genuine competence. They innovate, they build something real.
They earn it.
Right. But over time, they get promoted beyond their administrative capacity. Or, crucially, they pass that wealth down to heirs who simply do not possess the management skills of the original founder.
Which makes me think of thermodynamic entropy,
Hmm.
but applied to a family trust fund or a nation state.
Entropy is the perfect word for it.
Because a sandcastle naturally washes away unless you constantly expend energy to rebuild it. The system always trends toward disorder.
And that thermodynamic reality brings in the second concept, which is the Red Queen hypothesis.
Remind me how that works again.
So in evolutionary biology, it's the idea that species must constantly adapt just to survive against opposing species that are also evolving. You're running as fast as you can just to stay in the same place.
Oh, right, like Alice in Wonderland.
Exactly. And applied to human institutions, property owners must constantly exert energy to defend their holdings against, decay, taxation, competition, shifting markets.
But because of that Peter principle, because the competence degrades over a few generations, they lose the ability to actually innovate.
They do. They stop creating new wealth and just try to build walls around what they already have.
Wow. And the sources place this dynamic in a pretty long lineage of historical thought, don't they?
They really do. They reference the 14th century philosopher Ibn Khaldun. He wrote about this concept called asabiya, which is essentially social cohesion and competence.
And he said that naturally erodes.
Yeah, he observed that it naturally erodes over a few generations of an empire's life cycle. And modern anthropologist Joseph Tainter echoes this too in his theories on why complex societies collapse.
Right. Tainter says the return on investment for problem solving eventually goes negative. Like, bureaucracy just creates more bureaucracy.
Exactly. But, you know, the author didn't just write a philosophy paper about this. They actually built an agent-based Python simulation to test it.
Which is wild. They wanted to see if incompetence creep actually crashes a system mathematically.
Yeah, and the simulation data is fascinating. So they modeled 50 independent family units over 20 generations.
Okay, 50 families, 20 generations. What were they tracking?
The code tracked key metrics like the acquisition of resources, the degradation of competence, which they coded as a mathematical proxy for management skills, and the frequency of interfamily conflicts.
So walk me through what happens in the baseline run. The one without any of the futuristic AI or automation we'll discuss later.
Total systemic failure.
Really, just complete collapse.
Complete collapse. Without automation compensating for human error, the average resources per family crash dramatically. They start at a healthy baseline of around 77 resource units.
Okay, 77.
But by the 20th generation, unchecked incompetence leads to a cascade of mismanagement. The resources decay to a microscopic fraction.
How microscopic?
We are talking about a number with 144 zeros after the decimal point.
Oh my God. So essentially zero.
Yes. The society completely starves itself out.
That's insane.
And as the overall resource pool shrinks, the disparities between the simulated families become extreme.
Because someone has to hold on to whatever crumbs are left, right?
Exactly. The families that retain a tiny bit of competence hoard the remaining resources, and that triggers the simulation's conflict algorithm.
How much conflict are we talking about?
In the baseline run, violent interfamily conflicts occurred in 14 out of the 20 generations.
Wow. So that simulation perfectly sets up what the author calls the lords versus lawyers cycle.
It does. This is the historical engine that supposedly drives every civilizational collapse, according to the author.
The narrative here is really sweeping. Let's break down this cycle. The author posits that wealth creators, let's call them the lords, initially build immense value.
Right, they are the competent founders.
But as we just saw with incompetence creep, their focus inevitably shifts from expanding the pie to merely defending their slice of it.
Yeah. And if I'm a worker in that system, I'm going to start noticing that my boss, or the lord of the manor, isn't actually contributing anything anymore.
Exactly. Your voluntary labor starts to feel like forced extraction. You're generating surplus value for someone who just inherited the title and doesn't actually know how to run the business.
And that resentment is the catalyst for the whole cycle. The laborers realize they cannot fight the lords directly because the lords have the wealth and the guards, so they hire advocates.
The lawyers.
Right. They hire what the author broadly categorizes as lawyers. This includes literal attorneys, of course, but also politicians, union leaders, and revolutionary figures.
Anyone who advocates for redistribution.
Yes. The workers use these advocates to legally, politically, or violently extract the hoarded wealth from the lords.
And the sources trace this all the way back to the Black Death in the 14th century, which honestly is a brilliant historical pivot point for labor economics.
It really is. I mean, the plague wiped out up to 60% of Europe's population.
Which is just unfathomable.
Right. But suddenly, the dynamic flipped. Labor was incredibly scarce, making the surviving peasants highly valuable. Meanwhile, the agricultural land owned by the lords plummeted in profitability.
Because there was literally no one left to work it.
Exactly. So the serfs realized their leverage. They used royal courts and early legal advocates, the first lawyers, to break their feudal bonds and escape the lords.
That makes total sense. But the author argues this exact same cycle repeated in the American Revolution, right?
They do. The colonial narrative presented here is highly specific. The author points out that the founding fathers figures like John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were primarily lawyers representing the colonists.
So the colonists were the laborers in this model.
Yes, and King George III was the ultimate incompetent lord, hoarding the wealth across the ocean.
But there is a deeply provocative historical wrinkle the author adds here regarding the North and the South in America.
Oh, yes. The author notes that in the northern colonies, the climate didn't support large-scale chattel slavery. Instead, the North built the ships that serviced the southern plantation economy.
So they were economically tied together.
Right. The northern lawyers didn't need the king's legal framework anymore. But to win the revolution against the king, they needed the southern slave masters, the new feudal lords, to join the fight.
Wow. So the lawyers broke away from the king, but they deliberately inherited the slave system to maintain that economic alliance.
That's the argument. And that cycle held until Abraham Lincoln, who, the author points out, was a self-taught lawyer.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Right. Lincoln archetypally took all the enslaved people as his clients to break that specific lord-laborer extraction system.
That is a fascinating way to frame history. And then we move into the 20th century with the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah. As industrialization saturated the market, human physical labor was vastly devalued. An auto worker in 1960 was inherently less valuable than one in 1920.
Simply because factories were ubiquitous, right?
Yeah.
Cars were no longer a luxury novelty.
Exactly. So to protect their margins, the urban lords, the big business moguls, started hiring lower-paid women and children to replace the more expensive male workers.
And in response, the displaced men formed massive labor movements. They hired union leaders and politicians to build protective legal castles around their obsolescent jobs.
Right. The author actually views the major 20th century political ideologies, including communism and fascism, as massive competing workers' movements.
Really? Both of them.
Yeah, they essentially view them as competing governmental systems designed to enforce the extraction of wealth through the lawyer class.
Okay, so if you are listening to this right now and you're mapping human history as this constant cycle of a lord hoarding wealth, laborers getting resentful, and lawyers extracting it, you have to wonder, how does the author propose we break this loop?
It's the big question.
Right. If traditional governments are just the ultimate bloated expression of the lawyer class, what actually replaces them?
Well, the author's antidote is extreme. They propose completely dismantling the state apparatus.
Completely.
Yes, no more federal governments, no more municipal authorities. Society would be replaced by self-sustaining, biologically aligned family pods.
And here is where we encounter the highly rigid evolutionary psychology framework we warned about in the intro.
Yes.
Because the author envisions a society completely structured around specific gendered roles.
The source material explicitly defines these roles. Men are categorized as self-employed real estate developers and resource collectors.
Okay, and women?
Women are defined as human resource managers of progeny.
Let's examine the logic behind this architecture impartially, just looking at the mechanics. Why does the author believe assigning these specific binary roles solves the collapse of civilization?
The theory is that this hyper-localized structure eliminates the employer-employee war entirely.
Okay, how so?
Think back to the lords versus lawyers cycle. If every man is an independent operator, a self-employed developer focusing purely on building his own pod's infrastructure, there are no bosses.
And no subordinates in the traditional economic sense.
Exactly. You can't form a labor union against yourself.
Right. You can't have class conflict if everyone essentially employs themselves.
And the role defined for women managing the progeny is framed by the author as stewarding the ultimate human capital.
Stewarding human capital. Okay.
The author argues that by diffusing all economic and social power down to the level of the family unit, the massive political debates over who has authority over the masses just evaporate.
Because there are no masses to govern anymore.
Exactly. Disputes are no longer handled by a bureaucratic legal system. They are resolved internally via kinship norms. It's a structural attempt to engineer outclass conflict by collapsing all hierarchies into the biological family.
Okay, I'm trying to visualize what a random Tuesday looks like in this world.
Right, let's play it out.
Because if everyone is just surviving on an independent homestead, disconnected from a global supply chain, that sounds like a massive technological regression. Like we are basically back in the 1800s chopping wood.
And that is the crucial pivot in the author's vision. It is explicitly not a return to primitive agrarianism.
It's not.
Not at all. The entire model relies on extreme, localized technological abundance. The heavy lifting, the undesirable jobs like mining, logistics, basic manufacturing, and agriculture is entirely handled by automation and AI.
Ah, so the robots are chopping the wood.
Exactly. The author actually envisions what they call a 5-hour innovation week.
5 hours a week. That's the dream.
Because the automated systems handle basic survival, the human workload drops exponentially. And the argument here relies heavily on biological assertions regarding testosterone.
Right. The sources get very specific about this.
They do. Their author states that men have 10 to 20 times the testosterone of women, which they claim drives a higher variance in risk-taking, status-seeking, and building behaviors.
The theory being that currently, in our modern system, men are forced to expend all that high testosterone energy just to pay off their survival debt.
Exactly. Working 40 or 50 hours a week in a cubicle just to pay rent and buy groceries.
But if basic survival is automated, that massive inherent drive is freed up.
Right. If a family's foundational needs can be met with just 5 hours of work per week, which is mostly just directing AI and performing maintenance on the robots, the remaining time is channeled into genuine, explosive innovation.
So they aren't just sitting around.
No, the author believes this surplus energy, no longer trapped by corporate drudgery, will trigger a decentralized technological renaissance.
Now, a lot of people who look at an automated future immediately suggest universal basic income, or UBI, as the solution.
Oh, absolutely. It's the standard tech utopian answer. Let the robots work and let the government cut everyone a check.
Right. But the author vehemently opposes UBI.
Strongly opposes it. And they use a very striking biological analogy from the beehive to explain why UBI would be disastrous.
Yeah, remember this. The author compares UBI to feeding regurgitated honey to drones.
Right. In a literal beehive, the male drones don't do any productive labor. They don't forage, they don't build. They just consume resources and wait for an opportunity to mate with the queen.
And if winter comes and resources get tight?
The worker bees literally expel the drones from the hive to freeze and starve.
Wow. Nature's brutal.
It is. And the author believes UBI would have the exact same pacifying effect on young men. By providing a predigested monetary subsidy that requires zero effort, UBI removes the environmental pressure needed to build competence.
It turns them into dependent drones reliant on the state, the queen, rather than sovereign innovators building their own pods.
Exactly. The author argues that without the necessity to forge their own paths, young men would suffer stunted competence development.
Which brings us right back to incompetence creep. A society of pacified dependence is fundamentally fragile.
It's closed loop, yeah.
But I have to push back here, though. Let's play this out logistically, because I want to look at the transition period.
Okay, let's do it.
It seems like a massive blind spot in the theory. Let's say we have an urban family living in an apartment on the 15th floor in downtown Minneapolis in 2026.
Right.
How on earth do they transition to this self-sustaining, agrarian-esque pod? They don't own land to be real estate developers.
Yeah.
How do they get food on day one of this new system?
That is undeniably one of the most significant analytical hurdles in the source material.
It has to be.
Because a transition from dense, vertically integrated urban living to decentralized sovereign family pods would require a massive, unprecedented redistribution of land and resources.
And historically, whenever a society attempts to carve up territory to create self-sufficient agrarian units, it doesn't go well.
No, it sparks the exact kind of violent, bloody conflict the author's model is explicitly trying to avoid.
Right. If the landlord of that Minneapolis high-rise suddenly realizes there is no government police force to evict tenants, what happens? Does the city just empty out into the countryside?
It's a huge question. The author seems to rely on the idea that the sheer deflationary power of automation will make land and resources so abundant that the transition happens naturally.
But the logistics of untangling urban dependency are just totally glossed over.
They are. And there's another massive risk here, even if they do transition.
What's that?
Let's say they get their plot of land. If a family relies entirely on AI to manage their crops, purify their water, and build their shelter, aren't they just trading dependency on the government for dependency on an algorithm?
Oh, that's a great point.
It's a highly valid critique. The author actually warns against this, calling it digitized welfare dependency.
Digitized welfare dependency. So they recognize the risk.
They do. If humans over-rely on AI to the point of losing baseline survival and mechanical skills, they just recreate incompetence creep within the family unit itself.
Right, like they wouldn't know how to fix the water purifier if the AI goes offline.
Exactly. The proposed solution is that humans must remain the active directors and maintainers of the AI, not passive consumers of its output.
Okay, so assuming a family manages this transition and they have their automated pod up and running, a massive question remains.
The ownership question.
Yes. If there is no central government, no courts, and no police force, how do you actually own anything? How do you enforce a contract or stop a neighboring pod from just taking your robotic tractor?
To understand the author's solution to ownership, we actually have to look backward first. We need to look at the drafting of the U.S. Constitution.
Okay, take us back to 1789, because voting in the United States back then was heavily restricted.
It was largely restricted to white male property owners, which represented only about 6% of the population at the time.
And the sources point out that while modern audiences view this purely as systemic oppression, which obviously it was the architects of the system, based it on a specific pragmatic worldview.
Right. Property ownership was viewed as a proxy for competence and skin in the game.
John Adams explicitly argued this, didn't he?
He did. He argued that men without property lacked the independence to vote responsibly because their survival was dependent on others, meaning their votes could be easily bought or swayed by elites.
So the legal codes of the time were fundamentally oriented toward property management. Taxation, contracts, inheritance, land disputes.
The logic was, if you didn't manage property, you weren't deemed qualified to vote on the laws governing how property was utilized.
So how does the author update that 18th century logic for an AI-driven future? Because obviously we aren't going back to 1789 voting laws.
No, not at all. The author proposes flipping the entire paradigm. Instead of having a subset of humans vote on the laws that govern property, rightful ownership is embedded directly into the property itself via cryptographic computer code.
We are talking about smart contracts.
Exactly.
Let's do an ELI 5 for listeners who aren't deep into the crypto space. Think of a smart contract like a digital vending machine.
That's the classic analogy, yeah.
Right. The code says if you put in $1, drop the soda. There is no cashier to argue with. You don't need a judge to enforce the soda drop. The execution of the contract is mathematically guaranteed by the code.
Spot on. A smart contract is self-executing code living on a blockchain ledger. The author proposes that all non-human property, land deeds, mineral rights, robotic tools is tokenized and managed autonomously by these contracts.
And we should explicitly note here, the author specifies this is strictly for non-human property.
Yes, a crucial moral distinction within their framework. They state unequivocally that human ownership of humans is slavery and fundamentally immoral.
Right. But for a plot of land or a fleet of delivery drones, ownership is mathematically proven on the ledger.
Yes. If the cryptographic code verifies that your family pod owns it, you own it. There are no county clerks to bribe, no courts to appeal to.
And no politicians you can lobby to change the zoning laws.
Exactly. It makes redistribution demands completely obsolete. If the code allocates the crop yields fairly based on verifiable inputs, a resentful neighbor can't just vote to have your surplus grain taxed and given to them.
It neutralizes that entire lawyer class we discussed earlier. You cannot legislate against cryptographic math.
You really can't.
Okay, but a family pod cannot produce literally everything they need. They will need to trade at some point.
Of course.
But if there's no central marketplace, no fiat currency, and they are completely isolated, how do they interact economically?
This is where we get into the Moltbook environment.
I find the mechanics of this fascinating. Walk me through how a trade happens in the Moltbook.
The Moltbook is essentially a decentralized, highly secure communication and trading layer for AI agents.
Okay.
Every single family unit has an anonymous AI agent acting on their behalf. These agents operate within the Moltbook using a cryptographic protocol called ZKP's zero-knowledge proofs.
Let's do another ELI 5, this time for zero-knowledge proofs.
Please do.
Think of it like a bouncer at a nightclub. Normally, you hand the bouncer your ID. They see your full name, your home address, your exact birth date, and your physical description. They know everything about you just to verify one fact. You are over 21.
Right.
A zero-knowledge proof is like a magical digital ID that only shows the bouncer a green light. It proves, with mathematical certainty, that you are over 21, without revealing a single piece of underlying data about who you are.
That is a perfect analogy. Now apply that to a global economy.
Okay.
An AI agent can post a cryptographic proof to the Moltbook saying, my family has a legitimate demand for 100 units of wheat, and we have the verified funds to pay for it.
And they can execute this trade without ever revealing who the family is.
Exactly, without revealing who they are, where their pod is located, or what their overall net worth is.
Total privacy combined with total verifiability.
And because the demands and the fulfillment are completely anonymous, it masks disparities between families.
Which is a massive hack for human psychology.
It really is.
Because envy is a primary driver of conflict. If you don't know that the family pod 5 miles down the road has 10 times more wealth than you do, you don't feel the resentment that leads to the lords versus lawyers extraction cycle.
We actually see this exact psychological hack play out in the author's Python simulation.
Oh, right. The simulation with the 50 families.
Yeah. When they added ZKPs to the model, masking the wealth disparities between the agents, the number of violent interfamily conflicts over 20 generations dropped dramatically.
From 14 out of 20 generations.
Down to just 4. Envy-driven disputes were almost entirely eliminated simply by hiding the scoreboard.
That's incredible. And if you're listening to this thinking it sounds like a utopian sci-fi novel, you need to look at what is happening right now in 2026. The precursors to the Molt book are already active.
Oh, the infrastructure is being laid down as we speak. Look at Estonia.
Right. Estonia is a great example.
Their national land registries and health records are heavily digitized and secured using blockchain-like cryptography. They have removed massive layers of human bureaucracy.
Or tokenized real estate. Platforms like Propi and Realty are currently allowing people to buy and sell fractional ownership of physical, real-world houses using smart contracts.
The deed to the house is literally an NFT on a blockchain.
Exactly. And in the decentralized finance sector, or DeFi, protocols like Aave allow users to take out massive, multi-million-dollar loans using smart contracts.
And the code automatically liquidates collateral if the asset value drops below a certain threshold. There is no traditional bank, no loan officer checking your credit score.
And no human bias. It just executes.
So the financial and legal infrastructure is here. Which brings us to the physical infrastructure.
Perhaps the most visually striking idea in the entire stack of sources. Unstoppable real estate.
This is where the digital cryptographic world reaches out and shapes physical steel and concrete.
Right. Imagine walking down a street or out in an open field and seeing a house being built entirely by a swarm of autonomous robots.
Just a swarm of them.
Yeah. There are no human construction workers pouring concrete, no foremen yelling instructions, no city zoning inspectors walking the site with clipboards.
It is the ultimate expression of a permissionless economy.
The mechanics are wild to visualize. A fleet of robots selects a vacant site based on optimal geographic data. They build the house autonomously. But here's the kicker. How do you actually take possession of it?
This is my favorite part.
The physical locks on the doors of that robotic house dynamically generate a cryptocurrency address.
And the only way to physically unlock the front door and claim legal ownership of the house is to send a specific Bitcoin payment to that dynamically generated address.
I love the detail the author includes here about human error, too.
Oh, the typo thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because if you are sending your life savings in Bitcoin to a smart lock, you'd be terrified of making a typo.
Oh, absolutely. One wrong letter and it's gone.
Right. But the author suggests the locks would use fuzzy matching algorithms to be typo tolerant. If you mess up one character in the address, the code recognizes the intent and doesn't vaporize your funds into the ether.
It's a very practical consideration. But the term unstoppable is key here. Why is this model unstoppable?
Because it bypasses every centralized choke point that currently defines modern real estate development.
Exactly. There is no local zoning board holding a town hall meeting to deny the building permit because of neighborhood aesthetics.
There is no central developer controlling the supply of housing to keep prices artificially inflated.
And there is no bank required to issue a 30-year mortgage. The labor is entirely autonomous, and the payment network Bitcoin is borderless and censorship-resistant.
How does a local municipal government issue a stop work order to a decentralized swarm of robots that are funded by anonymous crypto transactions?
They can't. They literally can't. And again, the real-world parallels in 2026 are already testing these boundaries.
Right, like the Robonomics network.
Yes. On this network, robots are already acting as independent economic agents. They have their own crypto wallets.
Wait, really? A robot has a wallet?
Yeah, a drone can perform a delivery task, get paid in crypto by a smart contract, and then use that crypto to independently pay for its own electricity or maintenance downtime.
That is wild. And we also have Connex, which is operating as a decentralized marketplace for robot labor.
And on the heavy construction side, companies like Icon have been 3D printing modular homes for years now. They're actively scaling up their autonomous building capabilities.
Requiring fewer and fewer human operators on site.
Exactly.
Okay, robotic home building is one thing, but the author takes this concept of autonomous production and scales it down to the microscopic level.
And nanobots.
Yes, they envision self-replicating nanobots.
The concept of the nanobot hive.
Imagine nanobots acting as computerized Lego blocks. A swarm of microscopic 3D printers that can manipulate raw materials atom by atom.
To build literally anything you need, from a new smartphone to a replacement heart valve.
The lineage of this idea traces back to Eric Drexler's 1986 book, Engines of Creation,
where he introduced the theoretical concept of molecular assemblers.
But the sources highlight that this is moving from theory to tangible reality right now. There are current functioning prototypes at NYU and Columbia University using DNA nanorobots.
Yes, researchers are creating nanoscale structures using DNA strands as programmable scaffolds. They are essentially creating molecular robots that can self-assemble and perform basic tasks.
The manufacturing potential is exponential. I mean, if you have a vat of nanobots that can build more nanobots,
And then those nanobots can assemble solar panels or computers out of basic carbon and silicon.
you achieve total post-scarcity abundance. The cost of physical goods plummets to near zero.
However, any discussion of molecular assemblers raises an existential safety question, which the sources do acknowledge.
The gray goo scenario.
It's the ultimate systemic risk.
If self-replicating nanobots lose their programming constraints, if a solar flare corrupts their code, or a bad actor hacks them, they could theoretically consume all organic matter on Earth just to replicate themselves.
Turning the entire planet into a massive gray goo.
It's terrifying. It requires an infallible containment protocol. But if that containment is achieved, the nanobot hive represents the absolute pinnacle of the author's vision.
Complete, localized independence from human labor for the production of all physical goods.
So let's take a step back. In this theoretical world, survival is completely handled.
Food is grown autonomously, houses are built by robotic swarms, goods are assembled by nanobots.
Right. But human beings are not just consumption machines. We crave status, connection, and purpose.
We do.
If the struggle for survival is eliminated, where does the human ego go? This leads us to the author's intense critique of modern institutions, specifically what they call the validation economy.
And this is where the evolutionary psychology framework becomes its most controversial and provocative.
Very much so. The author uses two major analogies here, the Lion King dynamic and the beehive. Let's look at how they apply this to modern universities.
Well, the author argues that modern universities no longer function primarily as centers of knowledge creation. Instead, they function as validation hives.
Validation hives. Okay.
Demographically, females increasingly dominate university enrollment, particularly in what the author categorizes as unscalable activist disciplines.
By unscalable, they mean disciplines that rely on social signaling, bureaucratic management, or theoretical discourse, rather than tangible physical output like engineering.
Right. Meanwhile, a very small cadre of elite males sit at the top of this university hierarchy: administrators, tenured ideologues, prominent professors.
The Lion Kings?
Exactly. The author claims these men dispense what they call virtual royal jelly.
Virtual royal jelly being validation, good grades, institutional prestige, social capital, or ideological approval.
This dispensing of validation redirects the female student's energy away from productive, family-oriented life paths and toward attention-seeking institutional climbing or activism.
But universities are massively expensive. Who subsidizes this entire hive?
According to the author, it is subsidized by the undesirable men. The men who recognize they do not have the social status to compete in the university validation game.
So where do they go?
These men retreat into the scalable, tangible STEM fields. They do the heavy lifting of engineering, coding, and maintaining the hard infrastructure that keeps society running.
And their economic output is taxed and redistributed to subsidize the activist hive.
That's the argument. The author links this distortion of human energy directly to the sexual revolution. They impartially relay a deeply controversial economic theory regarding the intersexual bargain.
Right. The historical premise is that before modern technology, women needed commitment and resources from men to safely raise highly dependent human children.
And men, in turn, needed fidelity to ensure the children they were investing resources into were actually theirs. It was an economic bargain driven by biological survival.
But the author argues that reliable contraception and the modern welfare state completely decoupled sex from long-term provisioning.
The survival penalty was removed by technology and government policy.
Once that penalty is removed, the incentives flip entirely. Women can pursue validation and short-term encounters with a narrow tier of high-status men without needing their long-term economic commitment.
Conversely, high-status men can pursue recreational sex without the burden of provisioning.
If you're listening to this right now, you might be thinking, this sounds like a harsh, overly transactional way to view human relationships.
It's very clinical.
But let's look at the actual economic behaviors the author is pointing to, specifically regarding tipped labor and platforms like OnlyFans.
The author frames the massive rise of these direct-to-consumer intimacy platforms as a blunt market correction to the collapsing university validation mill.
Because the university can only hand out so much virtual royal jelly before the degrees lose their value in the real world.
Exactly. When the supply of institutional validation vastly outstrips the sustainable demand, and young women realize their degrees do not translate into economic stability, they migrate.
They migrate to platforms where they can directly monetize their appearance and attention.
And the author refers to this explicitly as deferred prostitution, utilized to pay off crushing student debt.
It is a brutal framing. But the economic pattern the author is highlighting is that technology first distorted the traditional intersexual incentives through institutions like the university.
And then technology created the direct-to-consumer tools like OnlyFans to bypass those very institutions.
So the question becomes, within the author's automated future, how do they propose to fix this broken validation economy?
Oh, this is fascinating. They introduce a concept that is deeply satirical but structurally brilliant within their framework. It's called hot.
Hot, right. And it exists within a vast AI meta-platform called the RoboState.
Hot Thought is envisioned as an AI-driven parody of OnlyFans, but it completely alters the economic flow of validation.
Here's how this wild concept works. Content creators still produce and submit their material, but they aren't submitting it to a platform of human subscribers.
No, they are submitting it purely as training data to an impartial AI algorithm.
The AI evaluates the content objectively based on its algorithmic parameters. There are no human simps paying exorbitant monthly subscription fees.
Providing artificial validation or developing parasocial emotional attachments to the creators.
And instead of paying the creators in fiat currency, the AI evaluates the value of the training data and automatically constructs literal functioning urban architecture for them.
The author compares it to an automatic Winchester mystery house. The AI deploys the robotic swarms we discussed earlier to build content studios, luxury apartments, or infrastructure for the creators.
Whom the author refers to as the princesses.
Right. This physical real estate automatically generates tangible value, effectively paying off their debt.
It's essentially OnlyFans meets SimCity. But let's look at why this matters structurally. What is the author actually achieving here?
Well, by replacing the human subscriber with an AI, Hot Thought removes the human lord, dispensing the validation.
It entirely neuters the simp economy and the massive psychological damage associated with it.
And the author explicitly mentions extreme cases of ego-fueled violence tied to this dynamic.
Yeah, they cite Grant Amato, who murdered his own family over the financial ruin caused by his obsession with a cam girl.
Or Courtney Clenny. When you have desperate men pouring their resources into a parasocial black hole for a scrap of validation, it leads to financial ruin and egomaniacal dissatisfaction.
By removing the human subscriber, the AI becomes the ultimate impartial judge and builder. It takes chaotic, destructive human desire and routes it into tangible, algorithmic production.
It depoliticizes the entire intersexual dynamic by removing the human element of rejection and entitlement.
Which leads us perfectly into the final piece of the puzzle. Economic reality. Because all of these theoretical structures, the family pods, the robotic houses, the AI validation systems, they eventually have to collide with actual demographics and real-world money.
And the current demographic data the author uses to justify this urgency is alarming. The sources reference an extensive analysis by Ken LaCourte detailing the global birth rate collapse.
It's stunning to look at the numbers. Global fertility is crashing far below the replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman.
South Korea is down to a catastrophic 0.68.
0.68. The global workforce is rapidly shrinking, which mathematically strains pensions, healthcare systems, and overall productivity.
Now, the common explanation you hear in mainstream discourse is simply that kids are too expensive to raise today.
But the author absolutely dismantles this inflation illusion, using a very specific set of data regarding the purchasing power of gold versus consumer goods. Let's look at the numbers.
The sources calculate the true cost of technology and sustenance in terms of a hard asset like gold, rather than fluctuating fiat dollars. In 2007, purchasing the original iPhone cost the equivalent of 28.79 grams of gold.
And in 2026, purchasing the newest iPhone 17 Pro, which is a supercomputer compared to the 2007 model, costs only 7.51 grams of gold.
The deflationary power of technology is massive. Or look at basic sustenance. A dozen eggs dropped from costing 0.195 grams of gold in 1976 to just 0.018 grams of gold today.
So the narrative that everything is more expensive is false. Technology and global supply chains are creating massive abundance. Things are actually getting radically cheaper in real terms.
But here is the catch, and this is where the author pinpoints the true economic disease. The 1976 federal minimum wage bought 10.73 times more gold per hour than the 2026 minimum wage.
Wow. Let that sink in for a second. The actual value of an hour of human labor has plummeted.
Fiat monetary debasement, the central banks constantly printing more currency, silently steals the purchasing power that families desperately need for long-term stability.
Specifically, they need it for foundational assets that don't benefit as much from Moore's law, like prime real estate and premium healthcare.
Right. Consumer tech gets cheaper, but acquiring the land to build a family pod becomes mathematically impossible on a standard wage because the currency itself is collapsing against reality.
The money is broken. So if fiat currency is just another mechanism for the lawyers to extract wealth from the laborers through inflation, how does the author's automated society handle money?
The proposed solution is algorithmic stability, achieved through a system called Competence-Linked Equity Payroll, or CLEMP.
Let's do a deep dive into the mechanics of CLEP, because this fundamentally rewrites how a human being is compensated for their time.
Under the CLEP system, employees are no longer paid a static salary in a debased fiat currency like dollars or euros.
Okay, what are they paid in?
Instead, they are paid in dynamically generated digital shares of their employer's stock, or the equity of the pod they are contributing to.
So your compensation is directly tied to the actual value you are helping to create. If the pod succeeds, your equity rises. If the company fails, your equity drops.
It forces skin in the game.
But how does that work at a practical level? I mean, I can't walk into a grocery store and hand the cashier a fraction of share of Apple stock to buy a loaf of bread.
And this is where the blockchain integration is brilliant. When you go to the grocery store and scan your items, the CLEP system interfaces with a decentralized exchange. Automatically. It liquidates exactly enough of your digital equity shares to cover the cost of the groceries.
And what is it pricing those shares against?
It prices them against a neutral algorithmic oracle, specifically Bitcoin. The transaction happens instantly at the point of sale.
So the merchant receives the Bitcoin, and your equity balance is reduced by the exact fractional amount required.
That is incredible. It completely removes traditional fiat money and the central banks that control it as an intermediary.
Your wages are utterly immune to localized inflation because you are holding productive equity that rises with competence, and you are transacting in a mathematically capped asset like Bitcoin.
It ties the entire overarching thesis of the deep dive together.
It really does. By shifting to self-sustaining families, replacing human labor with automated production, and compensating competence with dynamically liquidated equity.
The author argues we can escape both the incompetence creep of human management and the silent theft of fiat debasement.
It is a cohesive, radical, and mathematically rigorous vision of the future. But as we wrap up this exploration, I have to ask a fundamental question about human nature.
Go for it.
If we transition from this historical cycle of civilizational collapse to this perfect, frictionless algorithmic stability, is the human drive for conflict actually erased? Or is it just digitized?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. If we remove the human lords hoarding wealth and the extracting lawyers manipulating the laws, does the fundamental human instinct to conquer, compete, and dominate just find a new cryptographic battlefield?
The author's model assumes that providing absolute abundance through automation will pacify the destructive elements of human nature.
But human history suggests we are notoriously stubborn, and we will invent new ways to fight, even in a utopia.
To summarize the massive paradigm shift we've explored today, the source material envisions a future that replaces the extracted wealth, the bloated human bureaucracy, and the grievance politics of traditional governments with sovereign family pods.
We are looking at a proposed reality managed by ZKP-secured AI agents communicating in the Molt book,
A physical world built by unstoppable robotic construction swarms.
and an economy funded by competence-linked equity.
It is a blueprint for escaping the inevitable cycle of civilizational decay by entirely outsourcing our governance to impartial math.
But before we sign off, there is a profound vulnerability in this system that we must consider.
There always is.
If we successfully encode our entire civilization into self-managing smart contracts, autonomous robots, and algorithmic property management just to escape human incompetence creep, what happens when these autonomous systems encounter an unprecedented crisis they weren't coded to handle?
Right. A novel solar event, a cascading cryptographic failure, or a biological anomaly.
Do we lose the very chaotic, messy human adaptability that allowed us to survive the Black Death and the Industrial Revolution in the first place? If the code breaks 100 years from now, Will the descendants of these family pods even remember how to fix it?
A profound and terrifying question for a fully automated future.
Thank you for joining us on this intense architectural exploration. Keep questioning the systems around you, keep looking at how the code shapes your reality, and we will see you next time on The Deep Dive.